Welcome to the second panel debate today, and that is, my name is Charlie Corbett. I'm the editorial director of Euromoney Conferences. This afternoon, we're going to be talking about the Egyptian capital markets, and hopefully get to the bottom of how Egypt can not only attract more foreign direct investment, but also keep it. We're lucky enough today to have a group of speakers that represent a smorgasbord of national and international finance. And over the next 40 minutes or so, I hope we can cover every facet of the capital markets in Egypt, from corporate, financial and government debt through to equity capital markets, IPOs and the increasing role of the private sector. I'm going to be asking the panel how they think the situation has improved over the last few years and what more needs to be done to deepen capital markets and attract more sticky money. Before we start, we've got a poll as well. We've got an interactive poll which you can access via your apps if you've downloaded the app. I'm hoping we might get the poll up here. If not, I can read it out because it is public issuance crowding out the private sector, yes or no? That's something we'll come back to later. But that's enough from me. First of all, I would like to welcome our panel, and could you each quickly introduce yourselves, starting at the end with you, Ashraf?
Okay, my name is Ashraf Ghazali. I work with NI Capital, and we are a licensed company under the EFSA regulations as investment banker and asset managers.
Hello, my name is Andres Kostopoulos. I'm responsible for the regional effort of Citigroup in the markets of the Middle East and Pakistan.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Mahmoud Baha. I'm the country treasurer and the head of capital markets for Al Tijari Wafa Egypt, who have just acquired the Barclays Bank 3 or 4 months ago. So I've been working in Barclays Egypt for the past 10 years.
Past 10 years. Well, we'll talk a little bit about that later, I think. Well, thanks all. I'm going to go straight into quite a broad question before we get into the nuts and bolts. Just a little bit of insight. We've just heard the finance minister, His Excellency, speak. I'd be very interested to get the panel's insights on the reform programme so far, the changes for the better, and what more they feel needs to be done. Ashraf, I'll start with you, and we'll work back towards me. So personally, maybe a comment on what you feel about what the finance minister said today.
I think the finance minister was pretty clear about what has been achieved over the last year in terms of fiscal and monetary reforms and its impact on the business environment in Egypt. And I think it's one thing that's very clear is finally that Egypt, after 5 or 6 years of challenges, at least there is vision. There is an economic reform program that's clear to what needs to be achieved in terms of on the fiscal front as well as the monetary front. So if we take into account what has been achieved over the last year and over the last 2 or 3 years, coming back to your first question, is that we have seen several number of IPOs that was taken to the market from the private, led by the private sector, whether it's local listing, GDR or London Stock Exchange listing, and reasonably these were successful IPOs and in different sectors altogether. What we should capitalize on nowadays with the economic reform program is capitalize on the momentum of the program as far as pushing more capital market tools or issuance to the capital market to capitalize on the devaluation, capitalize on the shrinking size of the capital market in Egypt, that I think take into account all these reforms furnish the ground for growth on the capital market. Especially we have been seeing quite appetite from local and international institutions on investing in on the equity market per se.
Okay, thank you, Ashraf. So, Anders, what do you think? So, just a bit of insight on what you think about, the difference these reforms have made, and also, what more perhaps could be done.
Well, it was a very positive start that was necessary for the government to manage to bridge finance the Egyptian economy until the point of the FDI suitability of investment starts flowing in the country. It has been successful so far. and we have seen strong resolve by the government to implement changes. We are seeing these flows through the debt markets and especially towards the sovereign debt. And gradually, we need to see the reforms that will attract foreign direct investment.
Yeah. Mahmoud, so in terms of growing, Egypt's capital markets represents 20% of GDP, and that's down from 70% in 07-08. Are these reforms going to, enable it to become a much larger?
Definitely, and I would agree with my colleagues that, this is like a cycle. We just started it back in November, so we're still even 1 year, or we're approaching the first year after this whole changes. This will take some time. However, from the debt market side, I would say that we have seen lots of investments and lots of appetite from foreign investors that reached recently around $16 to $17 billion, again representing around 17 to 18% of the total outstanding debt by the government of Egypt. If we just compare this percentage to where it was in December 2010, before the revolution, it was 23%. So if we're talking now about 17, 18% of the total outstanding owned by foreign investors, this is a clear indication that we're heading in the right direction. But we need to give ourselves more time in order to start seeing the positive progress and the positive outcome.
So we need more time, Ashraf. It's essentially, how much more time do you think it's going to take?
Well, I think you've touched base on a very important issue, which is the market cap to GDP. If you look back to the history of around maybe 2007, the market cap to GDP was around 105%. Nowadays, where market cap to GDP is roughly between 16, 15, 16, 17%, more or less. This gap of 90% so far, it's a gap of liquidity, it's a gap of potential growth to basically finance or fund the upcoming expansionary cycle. So the whole role, I think, for the government of Egypt nowadays and for the capital market going forward is to expand that market cap to GDP, because over time we have seen a massive correlation between the size of capital market and the GDP growth. So if you bridge that gap through new issues to market, of course, at the end of the day, it really depends on market appetite if the market can swallow this kind of primary and secondary issues. But this is a very important issue that the government and the capital market should focus on, bridging that gap to improve liquidity to the market going forward.
Improving liquidity. Anders, do you agree with that?
I think that that liquidity needs to be brought from the international capital markets. And we need to do more and see further signs of recovery and reforms before we can credibly expect significantly more flows to the tune that Ashraf mentioned. It's a good start. Agreed completely. Yeah, it's a good start. But we can not expect the current framework to be attractive to every single investor out there.
I want to go a little bit back to the IMF loan and the difference that made, having that agreed, to your confidence and your optimism. What difference does that kind of backing make?
I think I would say, between brackets, this is like a quality certificate for the Egyptian economy. There were lots of talks around the ability of the Egyptian government to reach an agreement with the IMF. Even I recall in 2012, we were about to sign a program with the IMF, but it didn't work. So lots of foreign investors were waiting for this to happen, because basically they believe that the Egyptian pound is overpriced. It's subsidized by the regulator, and they were waiting for this change to happen. However, during these 3 years, we have been receiving lots of asks from different foreign investors asking about Egypt. So basically, they identified the market as a potential market for growth, but they were waiting for the right time to start building up their position. After the flotation, it took them around 1 or 2 months to start seeing the incremental growth in their position. And as I highlighted in the beginning, it now reached $16 billion compared to almost less than $500 million during the last 3 years before the flotation. So, I mean, the way they received this was very positive, and until now we are still seeing lots of demand from foreign investors. Even in terms of the reflection of the hike, for instance, by the regulator on the T-bills market. So the regulator hiked the interest rate by 7% since the flotation. This was reflected on the T-bills market. However, now the increase versus the before flotation date is only 3%. So it increased to reach 23% level, and now it's trading around 18 or 19%. So again, a clear reflection that people are even willing to increase their demand, even if rates are starting to move down gradually.
Well, that's the key, isn't it, Anders? That people will continue. 17 billion, I think, is the latest number that's come in since the devaluation, since the flotation. But the key point is when rates start to go down, that it continues to come in.
That is a key point in the Egyptian economic turnaround. But that is something that comes later in the process under any IMF program that we have seen so far. The Egyptian government showed and highlighted its resolve to improve the lives of the Egyptian people through an agreement with the IMF that was completely optional to it.
Yeah.
And its adherence to the implementation of those steps indeed highlights that resolve. And that is what is bringing the capital in.
Yes.
We have seen that inflation has suffered through the package around the IMF aid, which was devaluation, and that has led the IMF to, or other factors, to press for higher interest rates recently. But I think that we're now in a trajectory that we should be expecting over the next 12 months significant improvements in the cost of money.
Ashraf, would you agree with that? I might wind back slightly back to the devaluation as well, or the flotation. There's quite a lot of short-term pain for people, and it takes some resolve from the government to sort of keep going. Getting rid of the subsidies.
Well, basically tying up the IMF program to the devaluation as part of the entire reform program. In my humble opinion, the IMF program, simply, to put it in simple terms, have created a much more stable economic environment for Egypt, given the fact that Egypt is committed to fulfill the program's obligations going forward. Two, it's opened the access to international markets, whether through the debt market or whether through the capital market in general. On the fiscal front, the IMF program also have clearly outlined the key challenges that Egypt faces in terms of narrowing the gap of budget deficits going forward and increasing government revenue in terms of VAT and challenge some of these money into a much more needed sectors such as education and healthcare and so forth.
Exactly. So it's not just about cutting costs, it's about increasing revenue.
Exactly.
Exactly. Yeah. So we've kind of established that Egypt is, for international investors, is a buy. Would you agree? So now they're looking. They've obviously, I don't know, Citi were involved with the 4 billion euro bond, which was a great success. Actually, I might ask you, what made that deal? Because it was heavily oversubscribed as well, wasn't it? What made it?
It was a successful transaction, both because of the reforms the Egyptian government was embarking on and had indicated its commitment to those reforms, but at the same time, the Egyptian sovereign was underpenetrated in the international debt markets. There was a lot of room in investment portfolios for it.
Yeah.
And it thankfully went very well, and we think that it will continue going very well.
And a good yield for everybody. And they want to raise, there's talk, I read today, the government seeking to raise 21 billion over 3 years on international markets, and including using other currencies. So outside the euro and dollar, there's talk of the yen. Do you think these are now real deal? Are these deals possible now?
I think it's possible, and the Minister of Finance had just announced recently that there is a plan now to issue 1.5 billion euro bonds issued in euro currency. I think this is going to be the first one internationally. And I think there are more to come, because even I've heard during his interviews that there is a clear plan by the government to start tapping in the international market, while they are balancing, or they are reaching a balanced figure between depending on international debts and local debts as well.
Great, Ashraf. Do you think this is going to continue? That there's always, this popularity in international markets in terms of different currencies. Is this?
Well, I mean, 2017 and part of 2016 have been a very active debt market on the international market. And Egypt, as an emerging or developing country, with the IMF economic reform program that Egypt is aggressively or boldly move in front, that's really, in my opinion, that momentum should continue going forward with the commitment of Egypt, on implementing the program. So, in my opinion, that trend is expected to continue as long as also the international debt market is continuing on this, based on the same momentum that has been taking place.
And it's the momentum. It's interesting, in the poll in the panel before the minister spoke, I think the biggest worry was keeping up the momentum of the reform package. What do you think could derail, what could derail this reform package?
I think the main challenge, I think, with all of the reform moves that has been taking place, the new investment law that came into place that incentivized certain industries and sectors going forward, in my opinion, the underlying issue when it comes to legislative overlapping to smooth out the way of doing business in Egypt. This is the issue. I mean, you've done, or Egypt, or the government of Egypt have done very bold moves on the economical, fiscal, and monetary fronts. What's needed now to unleash that potential going forward is to pave the way for legislative reform to ease doing business in Egypt in terms of licensing, in terms of things like that.
Because it's there 120 out of 190 in terms of the doing business index, so that needs to be brought down. Anders, do you agree with that?
I think the tough reforms are ahead of us.
Oh, sorry? Oh.
The difficult reforms are ahead of us.
Right. So the hard bits to come. So they've done the easy bit.
That was the less hard bit compared to what is coming.
Yes, okay. So
and I think that the market spreads capture that and the risks around the implementation of that reform program, which is indeed end-loaded. Regarding the part you were discussing earlier about the IMF program and how it helped, what we must take into consideration was the success of keeping those funds in foreign currency reserves. Mm-hmm. And that has created the comfort to investors to come in the market, knowing that they will be buying assets in a currency that can be backed adequately by the central bank. The program that the Egyptian government is embarking on in further Eurobond financing can help in that direction. And giving this comfort in the FX markets about the value of the currency and the stability of the currency can go a long way over introducing new capital in new asset classes outside sovereign debt that do not currently benefit from either repatriation arrangements or other arrangements. So that is going to be pivotal.
Okay. As interesting, I mean, in terms of the stable currency, do you think it has stabilized now?
It has, yes, to a degree. There are obviously risks ahead. As those are left behind us, the currency will continue doing better and better. Would you agree?
Yeah. I agree.
Yeah. To a point, but reforms need to continue. A lot of the positive expectations are already built in the value of the currency.
Okay, and I mean, do you agree the hardest reforms are yet to come, or are we over the hump?
Well, I would say that this is like a journey. We started it back in November 2016. There are going to be lots of headwinds and tailwinds as we are going through this journey. We have overcome lots of challenges, but definitely there are still more to go. But just to comment on the feedback from people in terms of the ability of the Egyptian government to continue their plan. Definitely, this is a challenge. Everyone is concerned about it. However, in my view, I think we already, and it's like we pulled the trigger. So there is no way that we go back to where we used to be in the past. Yeah, we have to continue doing as much as we can to ensure that at some point of time we will reach the success.
Okay, I'm going to slightly move on now to our poll, which we have some results up there. Is the public sector issuance crowding out the private sector? I'd be very interested, and I'm sure the audience would be very, so 69%, almost 70% say that it is. I'd love to get the view from each of you, actually, on what you know, the results of that, and whether you agree with the audience. Ashraf?
I don't agree myself.
You agree?
No, I don't.
You don't agree?
I don't agree.
Why don't you agree on that?
It is clear that the public sector is definitely, for the time being, have been carrying a lot of load as far as streamlining the business activities in Egypt over the last 5 years. The last 5 years, the private sector, given the lack of clarity, the lack of vision, the lack of reform, were kind of shy a little bit to invest onto the market one way or the other. The public sector have been fulfilling that gap in the initial stage. But my point is that the public sector were fulfilling a needed gap rather than it's their main interest to basically proceed on business opportunities to replace the private sector. In my opinion, given and we've seen this over the since November, we've seen a much more appetite from local and international institutions to invest on the local market, which hints that the private sector will play a greater role going forward, in my opinion.
Yes, which we'll come on to a little bit later, actually, because I know you're heavily involved with that.
Sure.
But I'll just quickly get the other panelists' view on this poll. Do you disagree as well with this?
I'm not seeing the loan growth in Egypt. I'm seeing 55-60% of bank balance sheets invested in T-bills. I'm seeing loan-to-deposit ratios of 45 to 48%. There's not enough loan growth. There's not enough credit appetite.
Yeah.
I am not seeing how there's demand that is being capped. I understand that the very high interest rates are curbing back credit appetite from corporations.
Yes.
I get that. But that has less to do with the sovereign borrowing activity. And it has to do with the macro scenario that keeps rates high.
So it's a sort of apples and oranges scenario. So they're not linked in that way.
Yes, I think we will see more and more credit appetite by the companies as interest rates start
Come
lowering.
down. I mean,
Around 10 to 12%, we should see a significant change in demand for loans from where we are now.
And do you think,
rather than T-bill issuance.
Exactly, it makes total sense. But these rates, are they going to come down next year? Are we going to see more activity in borrowing from Egyptian corporates to build their business?
Definitely, yeah. I cannot give you a specific figure for the interest rate by next year, but what I can say is we are starting from November, the inflation rate will start to decline, and this definitely will be reflected on the market. We are expecting to see a huge growth in terms of customer appetite to expand even either existing clients or new to the market clients in the year 2018. But again, let's not forget this 2017 was like the first year after the flotation. Everyone was waiting and see. Everyone was in the steady mode, waiting to see the result of this experiment. This is the first time for Egypt to move into a free float regime. So lots of people will wait and see to what extent this will progress, and then they will start building their position based on the performance of the market. If you may allow me also, I want to also comment on the one point regarding the hot money.
We're back to the hot money, yes.
Yeah, because it was...
I wondered how long it would take till we got to that.
It was a very hot topic in the...
Short-term liquidity, I think we're calling it.
I would call it actually foreign non-direct investment.
Right.
So basically, yeah, I know that a country or an economy cannot rely on this. However, this is very important, and this is, normally it comes in the beginning of this experiment, because FDIs will not come in the following day after you made all the reforms, because these reforms will take some time to start seeing the progress in terms of legislation, conflict issues, convertibility of currency, etc. But the hot money or this short-term investments were very important for the country. First, to restore confidence in the market. And secondly, also it's a test, I would say it's a test for FDI to see to what extent foreign investors are able to enter and exit the market flexibly using the central bank repatriation mechanism.
And the key being the ability to exit, I suppose.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this was tested several times. The regulator has a clear repatriation mechanisms for this money, and they can enter and exit easily. Even in February, when the exchange rate went down to around 15.5 or 15.7 level, we've seen some customers are unwinding their position and they came back in the market. So I would say that this is very important even to give confidence on about the ability of the regulator to pay back the foreign currency.
Because, yeah, you're happy to invest if you know you can take it out quickly. I mean, do you think, Anderson?
Yeah, well, that's a point that has been, I think, very overrated in Egypt, the repatriation mechanism and the restrictions are on repatriation. If you do observe the behavior of T-bill investors since the start of the float, you will see that less than first of all, more than 80% of the investments go via the repatriation mechanism. And of those, less than 30% actually repatriate. So the vast majority rolls their investment. Which means that the investors are actually looking for confirmation of the reform policies so that they continue being invested. The repatriation mechanism was an interesting option for which to attract the initial investments. I am seeing that gradually it is causing more problems to other asset classes rather than helping the T-bill market that much.
You're nodding there.
No.
No, yeah. Do you have a comment? You agree with Anders on the repatriation and its impact?
No,
or the ability to.
But I would say that I may tend to agree, but it was important at this point of time because these customers or these foreign investors need to make sure that they will have the right and the ability to exit the market whenever it is needed. So before the 2011 revolution, we didn't have this repatriation mechanism. Customers were entering and exiting the market whenever they want to. But because of the challenges we have faced over the past 5 to 6 years, I mean, this was needed at this point of time. And I think with the increase in liquidity in future, maybe we will return back to normal days, and even some investors would like even to go through the normal liquidity market rather than going through the repatriation mechanism. And they will be willing to take the risk.
Right, yes.
I agree with Mahoud on that. Better FX market, interbank market liquidity, and a higher steady stock of foreign currency reserves at the central bank don't need any repatriation window.
Yeah, and it's all about liquidity, essentially. I mean, that's the bottom line in everything, isn't it? And speaking of liquidity, I know we had the chair of the Egyptian Stock Exchange this morning for an interview, and he was going to be on our panel, but he couldn't make this afternoon. I might direct to you, Ashraf, as sole advisor to the government on its IPO scheme, on increasing the role of the private sector. Do you think there's a lot of talk about it, and there has in the past been a lot of talk about increasing the role of the private sector, but do you think this time we mean it?
Well, I hope so.
Well, you are the sole advisor.
I hope so. All what I can mention about this is that based on what I have seen or what we've seen in NI Capital, the government directions going forward, it is clear that there is a clear sign and directions to increase private sector participation in the economy. And you can see this in so many different fronts. And personally, I think going forward, the private sector, with the new regulation, with the new establishment of private sector businesses that's taken place or has been taking place over the last couple of years, in my opinion, private sector will play a much greater role than the private sector. But one sign that's at least encouraging from the government, we have been mandated by the government to work on listing some of the public sector companies to the local and international stock market to increase the size and the exposure of certain sectors to the capital market. The government has been committed to do so, and I believe there will be sequence of government-owned enterprises that will be listed to the local and international markets. And I'm talking here, this is a little bit different than what Egypt have done in the past, in the late 90s. The government have hired us and other advisors to basically, one, to select the companies that are profitable, that can be listed, that can create value to the new investors and as well as the government. And in my opinion, this will help to narrow the gap of liquidity on the stock market and also encourage of listing new sectors. If you look at the composition of the stock market in Egypt, majority of it is banking and finance and real estate. Definitely with a country of the size of Egypt, with 100 million inhabitants, logistics sector is not being well represented in the market. Infrastructure in general is not well presented in the market. Petrochemical and so forth. So, and usually these kind of investments are mainly publicly owned. There is not much private. There are, of course, a few impressive ones from the private sector, but the majority of these sector has been heavily invested in the past by the government. By unleashing these companies to be listed, that's allowing private sector participation, allowing much better governance, and allowing much bigger size of capital market to improve the overall liquidity. So in my opinion, to conclude on this issue, I believe the government commitment to encourage private sector is very clear when it comes to this IPO program, as well as the new investment law with its incentive once we come over some of the legislative executive regulation to be out. I think going forward, it is clear that the government direction is to encourage private sector participation, but it's taken a little bit of time.
It's going to take time. And as you agree, I think the minister, when he spoke last, he said he wanted to unleash the beast. Do you think that, do you agree, Alice, that the structures are in place there in order to do that, in order to get a more diversified group of companies listing and also a diversified investor base? I mean, I was going to ask about Egypt becoming a genuine stakeholder society in which people own shares of their own business and what other sort of investors you could attract in to an IPO.
Well, all I can tell you, since we've been hired to advise the public companies, at the beginning of this mandate, we were quite skeptical whether there are some quality companies that can come to the market to be profitable and to have some interest on. What I can tell you now, after almost a year on this program of screening roughly about 600 companies, what I'm sure about is today is that there are tremendous amount of opportunities for quality companies, quality of earning companies, diversified, good management, good pipelines. I mean, the fundamentals of these companies, of what we've seen, and we prepare to be the sort of like the first batch of companies to be floated to the market. These are really large cap, blue chips, quality companies. I wasn't sure if Egypt had this kind of public companies on board in the past. But now, after we've done this homework, what I'm sure about is that these companies are there. And in my opinion, it will change the size of the capital market in Egypt to be, in my opinion, at least double over the next 5 years, depending on how fast we move. The question is, what's really stopping us? In my opinion, the government needs to go a lot faster as far as approvals and issuance and the will to really get this.
Is there something solid in the pipeline at the moment that we might see towards the end of the year or something like that? A big IPO that might come towards the end of the year? Appetite?
Yes. Well, first, I'm not at liberty to disclose any of the companies for some, but all I can tell you that we, and this is in the public domain, which we announced about maybe 3 months ago, there are roughly about 10 companies that are sizable and they have a very viable business models, in my opinion, and as well as other investment banks, which we involve international and local investment banks to get their view about these sectors and their views. And the overall feedback we got, we're very pleased with in terms of market appetite for these companies going forward. So whether we see one of these issues before the end of 2007, it's very unlikely, especially if it's a primary sort of issue. But we might see a follow-on offering hopefully before end of this year.
Thank you. You gentlemen are sort of on the not so much involved on the equity side, but do you have a feel, that this time it really does feel different in terms of change and long-lasting reform? Do you feel that now? It's different?
It is a fast-moving economy, especially over the last 12 months. Yes, things are changing and are improving. As we all agreed earlier, there's still a lot to be done.
Yeah, and the proof is always in the pudding. The money's going 17 billion.
Yep. And from what I heard, this effort to start listing public companies to attract equity investments, but also build the local depositors' culture towards equity investments in country is a great initiative. It's in the right direction.
Yeah, that's agreed in the right direction. And also, we should ask you really just about your new position, well, the new bank that and how that's been going, and kind of some of the motivations behind that purchase.
In fact, I would say that this is a clear reflection on the opportunity and the potential growth in this market to have a new Moroccan bank now investing in Egypt, significant amount of their investments because they believe in this market. I mean, they're very ambitious. They believe that they entered the market just on the right time. Lots of things to be done, lots of opportunities. Especially even on we're very strong at Tijari Wafa Bank is very strong in terms of in Morocco and in Africa or French-speaking African countries, and they even have a plan to expand this business in the English-speaking African markets.
Right, yeah.
And they believe that Egypt is the first market they have to enter in order for them to have the opportunity to expand their business across the rest of Africa.
Yes, well, you can't show much more belief in a country than buying
Exactly,
from the big
buying the
banks.
bank. Yeah.
And actually, speaking of which, so I mean, this brings us on to the banking sector in itself, and is it in a good position to support a thriving capital markets-driven economy? And if so, if not, what more perhaps could be done in that way? Anders, maybe we've not heard from you. But...
Well, I think it is in a position to help the economy. There's a lot of excess liquidity. If there's more help that can be offered, it's probably toward steering the government towards the reforms that are necessary. For one, for the introduction of a healthy mortgage market that would increase the credit to economy.
Yeah.
And secondly, towards specific corporate credit initiatives that can make it cheaper for companies to borrow. Liquidity is there. It's an issue of interest rates and certain rigidities in the processes.
Yeah. Okay. Ashraf, do you have a comment on the Egyptian
I think it's
banking?
well
You
said.
think that's pretty much covered it. So I'd be interesting, actually, just moving back slightly to maybe some predictions, which people love and hate, but I know that the minister, or I read in the paper this morning, that the inflation, they wanted to get down to about all predictions for inflation be down to 15% by the end of the year or early next year. Do you agree that that's possible? I mean, do you think that's a realistic ambition to get inflation to be 15%?
By the end of, I think they meant by the end of the fiscal year.
Fiscal year,
we're
sorry,
talking
the fiscal year, by the end of the fiscal year,
So we're
yes.
talking about June 2018.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a challenging target, but I mean, the declining trend will start from November. It's very difficult to predict where it will end by June 2018, but I think the declining trend will start and it will continue.
Inflation, do you think that 15% figure by the end of the fiscal year is realistic, Anders?
There is a base effect we expect after November that will improve things. I think it will depend a lot on the policies around subsidies If certain subsidies are reduced or lifted altogether, then it's going to be more difficult for inflation to be kept in those targets.
Of course, yeah.
So we'll see.
We'll see. Ashraf, what do you think?
It's a very ambitious target. I think it's I think, but for sure, inflation, in my opinion, with all of the monetary policy that we're seeing, should considerably come down. And also one thing that we need to consider, but it may not kick in within the next 1 or 2 years, which is basically the massive financial inclusion program that the government is launching through the central bank as well as the Ministry of Investments, should eventually help to haircut some of the grey economy inflationary pressure. So in my opinion, inflation is a primary target, obviously, and in my opinion, it will come down considerably.
And rates too, then?
It was discussed in this room that inflation is supply-led in
Yes.
Egypt, and I can see why. I
It's a series of
understand why.
one-offs,
Yeah.
essentially.
And unless we manage to attract enough international capital that can help with the supply side of the economy, inflation will continue being a challenge.
Yeah. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I agree. And again, there is the FX rate also, it does impact the inflation. So it's very difficult for us, to predict or to estimate where the FX rate will be by June 2018. But we all agreed that we are seeing that there is some sort of stability around this level. We cannot confirm that this is the fair value because I personally don't believe in the fair value. It's a free float currency, so it depends on the supply and demand and the overall performance of the economy itself. But again, the big part of the inflation currently has been dependent on is an importing inflation, which will improve once the FX rate itself it help.
Once that's settled.
In addition to the base effect, of course, by November.
Okay. We've got a few... sorry, Ashraf.
That's
Yes,
all right.
carry
If I
on.
may add to this, one thing that I'm very comfortable about is that most of the bold reform initiatives that the government is actually being taken, as well as the central bank, makes me very comfortable that inflation will considerably come down.
So, we're all comfortable. We're pretty comfortable that it will come down. It might not be by this end of fiscal year, but it will. It's going in the right direction, gently, gently. Now, we've got a few minutes left, and I might just quickly ask the audience if anyone has any short questions that they might want to put to our panel about the Egyptian capital markets. If so, raise your hand. Any questions? Well, if there aren't any questions, audience, I've got one more question which I'd like the panel to run through as a sort of final question, which is, for you, what is the single most important piece of reform or legislation that will make the biggest difference in terms of attracting FDI and keeping it? And I'll start at the end with you. The single biggest, most important, Ashraf.
In my opinion, again, it's the way of improving business environment in terms of way of doing business, approvals, license, regulations, procedures, legislative...
That bureaucratic, administrative side needs to be smoothed out, and that's what
red tape
would drive everything.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's, in my opinion, this is the biggest upcoming challenge, in my opinion, to improve the business environment. Yeah. So this is because the opportunities are there. You name it, in whatever sector, opportunities are there, growth is there, margins are there, appetite is there, demand is there. You literally have the whole land universal of basically making a good business case. So, and I think also from local and international institutions or investors, it's counted in, going through this huge red tapes on the government of Egypt, because you also, it's a lucrative market to be in if you calculate your risk one way or the other properly. So in my opinion, the government and the Egyptian economy can definitely grow at a much faster rate if we work through this
If we
business.
cut that red tape, how realistic is it that it's going to happen in the next few years?
I think there is commitment to get this done, but how long, I have no idea.
And it's on to you, the single most important piece of reform legislation that will make the biggest difference in terms of attracting FDI and keeping it.
Okay. I
Get ready.
do agree with Ashraf that a fast-tracking legislation for critical investments for the economy can go a long way, completely. What I would like to see is some framework that would make it clear that government agency participation in sectors of the economy does not come in the form of government intervention in those sectors.
Okay. Yeah. So less government, essentially. Mahmood, to finish us off, you've got 38 seconds. All yours.
Actually, I'll answer in a different way. So basically, I think FDIs, it will take some time, and we need to understand that there is an overall slowdown in the global economy. And I'm surprised the results of the first poll was showing that the component of this is very small. In my view, it's very big. Because remember, there are lots of economic and political issues all over the world. We have the Syria, Libya, Yemen conflicts. We have even the Brexit in the Euro. So
I didn't think Brexit would be brought up in the
no,
Egypt conference.
but I mean, it's very difficult now to convince investors to come and transfer or move part of their investments into a new market. Even the oil price now, it has been ranging between $40 to $50 per
Very
barrel over the
uncertain.
past 1 year. The Gulf countries now are looking for different alternatives to depend on for their future economies. They cannot keep on relying on oil only. So it's not an easy thing that you get an investor move part of his investment where he used to do business for like 10, 20 years, and he's very comfortable with this market to tap in a different opportunity in another market. So it will come, but I mean the government have already started to work on a clear framework for this to support the growth in FDIs, and I think we're heading in the right directions.
Great stuff. Thank you, Mahmood. Well, we've run out of time. I'd like to thank our panelists very, very much for taking the time to speak with us. It's been absolutely fascinating. I'd like everyone to give them a big round of applause for their valuable insights. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you. And we'll